It's prom season in the shop. Do you know how I know? Sequins! Today, we are going to hem the sequin dress. Let's get started. As always, we want to start with the measurement, but this little beauty has got a baby train, just a little short train on it. So we can already tell from the pinning that the front is going to be a little bit longer than the back. So let's start by laying it out and taking a look at what that difference is going to be, because we won't be able to take our side seam measurement for the final hem length like we normally would, just because we're getting less and less as we go to the back and then not cutting off the train. So I'm gonna go roughly at center front and take the pin that's holding the fabric up and move it down to the crease, because that is actually where our new hemline is gonna be. I'm gonna do that with all of my pins first. I'm moving from the center front and heading toward the side seam, and I'm going to actually even up the front and the back with the side seams in the middle to cut this. You'll see what I mean in a moment. Great. So as we're moving toward the back, you can see we have less pinned up, and then once I lay this out flat, we'll have a better idea. So I'm gonna push the lining up inside the dress for now. Let's get that out of the way and we can get back to that in a little bit. What we are looking at is front of the dress here, back of the dress here. So center back seam there and side seams on either side. Cool. So now let's lift this up a little bit higher so that you can see. This is where I just moved the pins to that crease line. So now let's see as they get lower and lower. Good. All right. I'm going to take my center back seam and hold on to it. You usually don't have a front, so I'm going to reach to where I think the front is. And now I'm going to flip the dress like this. Boom. Now I've got my center seams, or my side seams together, my center back here, and my center front, which is not a seam here. Why did I do that? Well, this way I can now move the pins that are marking where I need to shorten the dress in the front and cut from the front through the side seam, merging at the same angle as we go down to the back. And then we are not cutting the back off, so it's really just this front that we're gonna be shortening up. So let's start with our chalk. I think white chalk will be the easiest to see in this case. And we're just gonna start looking at our pins. We're gonna mark where the pins are first, and then we're gonna add our hem allowance. So we're not marking the cut line yet, we're just getting an idea. I'm gonna line up the edges. The rest of the dress can be piled up, that's not a big deal. What's important is that the edges of the bottom of the dress match. I can just barely see my pin through there. So I'm gonna make a mark there, and then I'll go in and remove these in a second. And I see another one there. That might be a little high for the merge, so I may actually make a little bit of an adjustment to that. And now I'm just gonna start working my way down, kind of like this. This is just to give me an idea, and probably coming off here, leaving that train like I said. Let's go in and remove our safety pins now so that we don't find them under the machine later. And we're gonna pin together the edges of this dress. Again, I'm gonna start at the side seam, and this pin is not marking anything, it's just holding the bottom edges together. So the chalk will ultimately mark where we are shortening the dress. The pins are just to keep everyone in line, or otherwise it gets uneven like that, and we don't want that. Perfect. Great. Okay. Now, let's come to the back of the dress with our seam ripper, because now we need to open up this seam. this is a great time to take a look at it. How is this sequin dress actually hemmed? Great question. All sequin dresses are different. They all have different styles of sequin application, but let's say that this dress covers 50% of the time. And 50% of the time, I'd say, it's actually just a straight stitch. So check this out. This is actually how it came from the factory. A straight, raw edge with a single straight stitch in a matching color that you can just barely see going through it. So, just like any other hem where we're keeping the train, here where we want the new length to match the old length, we're going to open that hem allowance so that we can get a good smooth merge. But while we're doing that, let's talk about how we put that stitching line in. The tricky thing about sequins is not actually how it's done. It is a straight stitch. That's the tricky part about it. So what is actually confusing about sewing sequins? What's difficult is that you've got a meshy layer, in this case, or typically a thin layer of fabric, and then you have this, let's call it little tiny chainmail, which is a hard plastic surface that your needle is coming down into as you sew on the machine. That's when it gets really tricky, because as the needle is coming down, it's either hitting this soft fabric, no problem, and then in the next stride, it's hitting these little shields, and that's the problem. So what do we do to remedy that? The most important thing is, other than having a machine that is strong enough to feed that type of material through, which matters, but most machines are, doesn't have to be industrial. There are definitely domestic machines that can. The most important thing is the size of the needle. We need a really fat needle. So on this one, we're going to use a 110. Though, spoiler, I will tell you, no matter what, when I sew sequins, I break a couple. So the other tool we're going to use are these little bad boys. I'm going to wear these while we're sewing it because genuinely when these needles explode, there's only one direction that they fly, seemingly. So once we sit down, again, we're going to use the same weight thread and the same procedure that we would for any straight stitch, but we're going to be using that nice heavy needle, and that is what's going to get us a good secure hem there. All right, you see how I've unraveled that there? Good. Let's do the other side underneath in the same exact place, and I'm going to measure that by remembering that my center back seam is there and picking a little bit of that there. Once we've let down this hem, then we'll be ready to cut. Great, and then I'm going to pin those down and in place, keeping everything straight. Let's see, I think we're at about 3/4 of an inch. So that's going to be the hem allowance that we leave. Let's line that up again, getting that nice and flat. These sequins do not like to sit still. So pinning these bottoms together, again, really important. And making sure that these are rolled out and flattened. Good. Good, good, good. And then as you can see, we've got just barely the chalk line that we put in earlier. And now we're going to add 3/4 of an inch to that. And I like to use my chunky plastic ruler for that, just to give me a general idea. Great. And coming up from there. You definitely can eyeball this if you are comfortable with that kind of measurement. 3/4 of an inch is a pretty common one, so no sweat there, but I am going to measure it for myself. I'm also going to even up this line a little bit. This pin was a little high for our merge and our front, So I'm going to bring that down a little. Again, pinning is not always exact when it's on a person who's moving and shifting their weight from foot to foot. So we're going to even up these lines after the fact. All right, now let's do our 3/4 of an inch after that. And again, I'm always favoring the lowest line, the line that removes the least amount of fabric, because we can always make it shorter. We can't always make it longer. Alrighty, there we go. And I really like this chalk, tailor's chalk, for this purpose, because it does tend to mark those sequins really well. The only case you won't be able to use it in, of course, is white sequins. All right, now let's get cutting. I appreciate having good vision. That's great. The lack of accessories from not getting to wear glasses out of necessity, I have a certain amount of envy. I wanted to take this up a little bit further. Great. And I'm always checking again and again to make sure that I've got my center back seam folding the garment exactly in half. It's just really important. All of the measurements for something like this, where the back is staying the same and the front is being cut, is super important to be equally marked directly off of that center back. Really, really important. Okay. Now that I've released a teensy bit more of that hem, I'm ready to cut in. Now, I always release this because later when we fold the whole thing back up and run it into the back, it's just gonna be nicer and smoother. Oh, let's talk about these scissors. Why am I not using my rotary blade? Because this will ruin it. Duh. These are a 6-inch tailor shear. Classic tailor shears are probably going to be more like an 8-inch, but this just fits my hand better. And these, I think you can tell, are pretty stocky, pretty heavyweight. You're going to need a really good shear, and even then, it's going to get through the sequins, but you are going to have to sharpen these. Definitely have a designated embellishments scissors for cutting things like sequins and beads and even metallic thread, because it does dull them no matter what you do, no matter if you use them right. But you need something heavy enough to get through, but set them aside and make sure that you don't mix them up with your other fabric scissors, because they're going to get worn unevenly from hitting those different little plastic plates, okay? All right. And it's going to be a mess. We'll have to vacuum after this one. Is it already time to put these on? I think it is. I think it is already time. Safety first. There we go. See how you can even hear the difference? You can hear it crunching through those sequins, and then just gently cutting through the fabric like any other fabric. Awesome. All right, great. Now, take out my little pin. Let's take a look. I'm actually going to shake this a little and get some of those loosies off, because I'm going to vacuum this up before anybody else puts something else up here. And then I'm giving it one more look to see if it's smooth. I'm going to smooth out this merge point back here. Just keeping it looking nice. And this side as well. Awesome. And remember, it came raw, and so we are going to leave it raw. Now, we're just going to pin our 3/4 of an inch up, and then we'll be ready to sew already. After I pin this up, I probably will give it a little press with the iron. Yes, the iron can melt the plastic, but if we don't hold it on too long, it should just give us a little bit of a gentle crease that will help us keep an even seam allowance as we're sewing. So I just want to get a little bit of that heavy roll out and get it a little flattened before we jump under the needle. And by pinning that up first, I don't always pin up. Sometimes I will just eye it. But in this case, I also kind of want to know which spots are going to stick out, potentially at odd angles, if they have thick sequins or just fabric. So luckily we've got that chalk line in there all ready to follow, and we're just moving all around. I'm pressing the seam allowances to whichever edge they already had them pushed to, and it looks like they had them pushed to the back. We'll keep a note about that later because that'll be a bulky area to sew, so we're going to go really slow there. And I'm just going to keep going until we find ourselves back at our original train. Awesome. Okay, let's give this a quick press and get sewing. All right, doesn't matter where we start. So I'll probably just start back here at the back of the train. And I'm using steam. I'm not gonna hold it too long in any one place, but this hot steam, you see how that's making that kind of settle down a little bit? And it's gonna be hard to move the iron on top of it, so this is more of a place and move situation, but I really like how much that's helping that flatten out and stay in place. That looks pretty. This will also take care of any additional chalk lines. We don't really need them anymore now that we've pinned everything up and we're just about ready to sew it down. So that is good too, so we don't have any additional confusing lines. We know exactly what we want to do. And almost there. Awesome. All right, the only thing we have left to do before we actually sew is change up the needle in our machine. So I have got a couple here. The only really important number you're looking at right here is this 100 and size 16. So once you get up over 100, that's when you're starting to get into kind of denim weight or heavier weight fabric. I am going to go with a 110 on this one, but I've got them as high as 125, size 20 here. So you can really get up there. Let me flip these over so that you can see. Can you see how chunky they are? They are pretty big needles. We'll compare it to the other one. I've got a 80 in the machine right now, and we'll be able to see the difference pretty clearly. Great, so we've got our little screw up at the top here. I'm just gonna loosen that the littlest bit so that our needle will slide down like that. And like I said, I think that's 80 or 90 that I've got in the machine right now. And we're gonna pop in one of our size 18 110s. And that little indent you can barely see, that goes toward the throat of the machine or the head. So I'm going to slide that in there and hold that tight all the way up and then tighten that screw up. Good, perfect. All right, let's get this threaded through and then get rolling. Perfect. Awesome. We are all set to sew. I've got my stitch length on between a 3 and a 4. We don't need it to be very tight, but like I said, I'm really gonna take this slow so that I can feel as the needle is traveling through those sequins, I wanna feel how much resistance there is there, and I really wanna take it slow, because if that needle, no matter that it is a thick one, if it hits it at the wrong angle and doesn't pierce the sequin directly straight through and hits it at an angle, that's when you're going to get the exploding needle phenomena. And we're going to try to avoid that as much as possible. You may also notice that the edge is a little uneven. Two things I'll say about that. One, it is pretty difficult sometimes to cut this sequin exactly straight. And so you'll notice that it did look like that when it came in from the factory, and that's okay. But we can also go back through and trim a little bit of that up later. I am leaving myself as much as 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch from the edge. This mesh and these sequins are not going to unravel, so it's okay to sew a little further from that edge. This is going to hold this up in place. All right, we're coming up to a pretty big bump here because we've got the sequins folded over themselves at the side seam, so we may need to reach over and use our hand wheel. I am just going to proceed with caution. I can feel the needle forcing its way through, so feeling and listening is going to be really important on this one, and not moving fast. If you move fast and you jerk it, you are definitely going to break that needle. Okay, we made it over the first one. Whew. I'm also using, my throat plate has got some measurements on it, so in this particular case, that 3/4 inch is helpful, and I am trying to use that as a little guide. Awesome. Great. Now, if you are sewing a lot of sequins, your needle is going to get really dull really fast from punching through that plastic. So, on average, a regular needle should be changed every 6 hours of sewing. Can you believe that? So, with sequins, it's going to be at least half that. But if you've been sewing sequins for 3 hours, you're going to need a break anyway. Dun, dun, dun. All right, we're going to give it one more press. See what I mean? What an accessory. We're going to give it one more press, really flatten it out. I'm going to have to vacuum this ironing board too. You're going to get more little half bits of sequins. That's just going to be the nature of the game here. And without my pins in it and with everything sewn in place, I'm able to move the iron a little bit smoother. So you'll notice I am kind of running it along, but I'm sort of holding some of the weight of it in my hand. I am liking this. This looks really nice. Ooh. See a little thread here. This would also be a good opportunity to even it up if you didn't like the bit of the raw edge, just by trimming out those little uneven sections if you're unhappy with that. While I'm ironing, that's my favorite time to do that. Get this up. I'm also looking to make sure there aren't any sections that I missed. Since we've got a lot of reflection and a lot of distraction with the sequins, and I'm trying to use a really good matching thread color, we want to make sure that we're not missing any sections of the hem, and this is the best time to look for that as well. Alrighty, we are almost back to the bottom of the train here. Good to go. All right, let's lay this out on the table for one last look. Look at that shine. That's beautiful. Awesome. So I am laying this out to look at it from the front. And really, I'm just looking to make sure that everything is looking smooth. You can see that the front is cut up and the back has still got that nice, deeper curve to keep that beautiful little sweeping baby train. So that's it. Look at that. Nice, secure. Shake off those last bit of little half-cut sequins. And we are ready to go. All right. Comments, questions, types of needles? We'll put all of that in the caption, but also ask me. Thanks so much for joining us, and see you on the next one.